Hello again, Charles Cowp here with the second of our 3 videos on the valuation of agricultural tenancies. In the first video we had a look at the background to tax and compulsory purchase valuations of agricultural tenancies. In this video we're going to have a close look at some of the cases which have gone before the Lands Tribunal over the years, considering these valuations in order to see what lessons we can learn from them. The first of the cases that we're going to look at is Wakeley and St Edmundsbury Borough Council. This was a case which arose near Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk, and it concerned the loss of some land to a housing scheme where St Edmundsbury Borough Council was the acquiring authority and Mr Wakeley was the tenant farmer. It's widely quoted in all the textbooks on compulsory purchase as being one of the most important cases that have gone before the Lands Tribunal on the valuation of tenants' interests. To some extent we're going to debunk that idea. Here's the valuation. There's quite a lot to take in with this, but if we just talk our way through it, this was a disturbance type claim where the member of the Lands Tribunal Award looked at it this way. Bearing in mind that this was in the early 1970s, he, on the basis of the evidence from 2 valuers, formed the view that the value of the gross output per acre from this arable farm near Bury St Edmunds would have been £103.50. He looked at the costs of achieving that output. They would be £16.50 for the variable costs, husbandry acts, all the cultivations and so on, £14. He put an interesting figure on fluctuation risk, the risk of both the value of the output and the cost varying from year to year, of £15, and took interest on capital invested in the farming operation at £4.50 per acre. That all came to £50, and that left a profit before rent per acre of £53.50. From that, the member of the Lands Tribunal deducted a notional rent per acre of £15.50, leaving a net profit of £38 per acre. He then had a look at the life expectancy of the tenant, which he took to be 33.5 more years, and decided he would capitalise that at a rate of 20%. So there we are, the years purchase single rate for 33.5 years at 20% is just under 4.989. That came to a capitalised net profit per acre of £189.60, and over the 126 acres which had to be taken, that was about £24,000. So in a sense what the member of the Lands Tribunal had done was to take the farming profits on an annual basis and capitalise them to represent the capital value today of all the profits that the tenant could be expected to make for the rest of the time he would have been at the tenancy on the farm in the absence of this particular compulsory purchase scheme. Curiously, however, considering that this is one of the most widely quoted cases on compulsory purchase and the valuation of agricultural tenants' interests, the member of the Lands Tribunal then went on to say that neither valuer, representing both of the parties in the case, had actually included in their claim any figure for the value of the tenant's interest itself. So in the absence of any evidence on what that amount should be, the member of the Lands Tribunal said that he would have to award a token figure for the sake of completeness in his award. The token figure he awarded was £100 for the whole claim. A curious outcome, especially given the prominence afforded to this case, because this tells us that the actual value of the tenant's interest had never really been argued or debated in this case. There is only the token figure to go on. However, if we stand back and look at it a little more broadly, we might well ask ourselves if the capitalised loss of profit doesn't represent the value of the tenant's interest, what on earth does? It's my view, therefore, that Wakeley is not as helpful a case as some of the textbooks would indicate. Nevertheless, it has been afforded this great importance because it is quoted so often. The next case I mentioned in the first of our little presentations, and that's the Anderson and Moray District Council case. In this particular case, it was estimated at the open market rental value on 13.5 acres at £30 per acre was a little over £400. Mr. Anderson was actually paying a very modest existing rent of only £44–45, so there was a profit renting contention here of £362 per year. In capitalising that, in other words taking a traditional investment method valuation approach to the valuation of a tenant's interest, it became clear from the evidence in the Scottish Lands Tribunal case that Mr. Anderson would have only remained as tenant of the farm for another 2 years in any case before the land would have been lost to private development. So his profit rent was capitalised for only 2 years, compared with the 33 years life expectancy in the Wakeley case, and the discount rate used here was 10% compared with 20% in the Wakeley case. That's a multiplier of 1.736, so the valuation in this case for the 13.5 acres was a mere £629. A very different outcome from that for Mr. Wakeley. The DV also conceded £750 for 2 years' loss of profits in the Anderson case, which in some senses seems to represent another example of the double counting that we've already seen in Wakeley. Now we come to the Baird case, which was actually a tax case. This was the executors of the deceased tenant, Mr. Baird, and the Inland Revenue Commissioners as they were at this time, and this was a case heard by the Lands Tribunal for Scotland. The arguments in this case were unfortunate because the Baird representatives argued due to the bar on assignment in agricultural tenancies that they therefore could have no market value. They didn't therefore seek to put in any valuation evidence on what that value should be. The district valuer for the Inland Revenue, as it was at the time, HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs now, argued the long line of authorities that shows that even an unassignable asset can be attributed a value for tax purposes to show that the agricultural tenancy could have a valuation, and therefore when the Lands Tribunal decided in favour of that argument, it had little choice but to accept the district valuer's evidence as to what that valuation should be. And here is the valuation which won the day in the Baird case. Basically, the district valuer had prepared a vacant possession valuation of the farm in question. He divided it between the better arable land, two lower grades of arable land, which he'd put in at £1,100 and £600 an acre, respectively. He'd put an even lower figure on some permanent pasture, and a very much lower figure indeed on some poor grazing, and he'd subsumed 18 acres of road and buildings in this same valuation. That gave a total VP value of just over £500,000, from which the district valuer deducted the value of tenants' improvements at £13,000. He then looked at the remaining value, just over £500,000, and formed the view that the tenant's interest equated to 25% of that value. He then added back on the value of the tenant's improvements to come to a total valuation of £138,000. What's the rationale for that 20%? It's far from clear if you read the case report, but it seems to go something like this. It would seem that the district valuer was looking at the vacant possession premium which would be available on this farm. Characteristically, for a traditionally let farm under the older agricultural holdings legislation, we might have looked to its investment value being something like 40 to 50% of its vacant possession value. So in this particular case, that value would have been somewhere in the region of £250,000, let's say, for the sake of simplicity. The option, therefore, is open to split the difference between that valuation and the vacant possession value if the tenant is willing to accept a payout from the landlord to go, or indeed if the tenant is willing to pay a premium over the investment value to buy out the freehold. That gets you to half the vacant possession premium, which, on the basis of the values you can see on the screen, would be about £125,000. It would seem that the district valuer got there pretty quickly by saying, well, taking a half of the half is a quarter, that's 25%, and that would be some rough justification for the valuation which you can see on the screen. It's a great shame that there was no alternative valuation evidence in the Baird case to test those arguments. This case at the time caused great worries really amongst practitioners who saw it as setting an unfortunate precedent for future valuation of tenants' interests. But then along came the Walton case, where actually 4 valuations were in dispute. The Walton case was based on a Yorkshire farm and was the same idea. What was the value of the deceased tenant, deceased tenant in the tenancy of the farm? The Inland Revenue's initial valuation was very much along the lines of the Baird case. They had agreed that the vacant possession premium on this farm was £200,000, and they took the view that that should be split 50-50 between landlord and tenant. There were also some tenant right and improvements worth £40,000, so that was a total value on the tenancy of £140,000. The late Mr. Walton had been the beneficiary of a half share of that tenancy, so his half was worth £70,000. So that was the Inland Revenue's opening shot for £70,000. The Inland Revenue's alternative valuation took an investment approach to the valuation. They looked at what the rent on arbitration on this farm might have been and took the view it would have gone up to £8,250. They then had a look at the rent payable, that was £6,000, and took the profit rent of that of £2,250. They took the view that that would stay in place for 1 3/4 years until the next rent review and capitalised that at a rate of 5%. So, yes, purchase, single rate for 1 3/4 years, multiplier of 1.62 gives us a value on that element of £3,645. But the district valuer didn't stop there. He went to have a look at an additional layer of profit rent, which would have been achieved by a subletting, as it were, of the farm. At the time of this case, tender rents were much higher than arbitrated rents because of those factors that have to be discounted in reviewing a rent under Schedule 2 of the Agricultural Holdings Act. So the view was that the tender rent would have been about £12,000. Deducting from that the arbitrated rent, which we've already seen, would give a top slice of profit rent at £3,750. That was multiplied by a factor of 5. Not altogether clear in the case where that factor of 5 came from, but the Lands Tribunal seems to have interpreted it as being a YP for 6 years at 5%. So we've got £18 3/4,000 of value coming in there. That aggregates to £22,300 altogether, but the district valuer went on to say, well, to be sure of being successful in bidding hypothetically for your own tenancy as a hypothetical purchaser, you would have to make a little bit of an overbid, which he put at 10%. So the value of the tenancy there was £25,000. Adding on the value of the tenant right, that will bring the total to £65,000. £32,500 by the time you've divided it for the half share. So they were the 2 valuations from the district valuer. Now let us see what the Walton. It was this valuation which was chosen by the Lands Tribunal. So as I say, 4 different valuations. Which one would you have chosen and why? In the third of our 3 videos, we'll go on to look at the way that choice is to be made for practical valuation purposes. So I hope you found that useful. You might find it useful just to rewind and go back over some of those cases and make sure that you understand fully the way in which those valuations have been built up before we go on to look in our third slide at how you can choose a suitable approach for any problems that you might be faced with. Thank you for listening.